Thanks for dropping by, and welcome to Solve Crimes series Caught After Death, where we will profile criminals who were positively identified for crimes they committed after they died. In 2018, California law enforcement found incredible success sending DNA of an unknown murder and assault suspect to a public genealogy and genetics research website. In short order, they were able to narrow down the genetically close relatives of the suspect and eventually to the suspect himself. After surreptitiously gathering DNA from the man, it ended up being a match, and they arrested Joseph D'Angelo, also known as the Golden State Killer, for 12 murders and over 45 assaults. As you can imagine, this caused cold case detectives worldwide to jump into action attempting to solve decades-old unsolved murders. Michael Sumpter terrorized the city of Boston in the late 60s through the mid-70s. Sumpter had a lengthy record with many sexual assault charges, but no murders. While serving a 15-year sentence for a 1975 assault of a Boston woman, he was released eventually to hospice care and died of cancer in 2001. In 2018, with the help of reverse DNA and forensic genealogy, the brutal truth was revealed what Michael Sumpter really was: a cold-blooded killer. Thankfully, 3 families finally have closure on who killed their loved ones 50 years ago. The problem is that these families will never see Sumpter pay for his crimes. He'll never hear a heart-wrenching or angry victim's impact statement. He will never be formally charged, tried, convicted, sentenced, and serve prison time for taking their loved ones away from them, all because he was caught after death. This is Solve Crimes. At 12:30 a.m. on January 7, 1969, 24-year-old Jane Britton, a Near Eastern archaeology graduate student at Harvard University, left a neighbor's apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She was headed to her own apartment nearby. The next day, her boyfriend and classmate, James Humphreys, tried calling her several times after she uncharacteristically didn't show up for an exam that morning. Jane didn't answer the phone. Concerned, he went to her apartment and encountered a horrific scene. Lying face down on her own bed, Jane had been bludgeoned to death and assaulted. Nothing was taken, and no one in the vicinity saw anything. Jane's death attracted national attention because her father, J. Boyd Britton, was an administrator at nearby Radcliffe College, a private women's liberal arts school in Cambridge. Curiously, her body had been sprinkled with red ochre, a mixture of ferric oxide, clay, and sand used in ancient burial sites of multiple civilizations, including indigenous Australians as far back as 40,000 years ago. That odd fact led police to think that a fellow student or teacher from Harvard's archaeology department was responsible. Ultimately, investigators were unable to find any viable suspects from Harvard. Another oddity was that a man had confessed to assaulting and killing a woman in the same building 6 years earlier in 1963, but he was apprehended on October 27, 1964. That man was Albert DeSalvo, better known as the Boston Strangler. For a time, it was speculated that there could have been a second Boston Strangler who was responsible for the Britton murder, but the case eventually went cold. In November 2018, just 2 months before the crime's 50th anniversary, Cambridge Police and the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office announced that they had identified a suspect in the case through DNA, Michael Sumpter. To date, it is the oldest case that Middlesex County law enforcement has ever solved. After the announcement, Jane's brother, Reverend Boyd Britton, said, "A half-century of mystery and speculation has clouded the brutal crime that shattered Jane's promising young life and our family. As the surviving Britton, I wish to thank all those, friends, public officials, and press, who persevered in keeping this investigation active. Most especially, State Police Sergeant Peter Sennett. The DNA evidence match may be all we ever have as a conclusion. Learning to understand and forgive remains a challenge." Ellen Rutchick, the second oldest child of Naomi and Philip Rutchick, grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota's Highland Park neighborhood. She graduated in 1966 from Highland Park Senior High School and from the University of Minnesota with a degree in American Studies in 1970. Corey Rutchick, the youngest sibling, was 15 when her sister was killed. She described Ellen as extroverted, beautiful, vibrant, intelligent, with a very large personality and a lot of friends. She had a lovely singing voice and was involved in choirs in high school, her sister said. After she graduated from college, Ellen Rutchick worked at a local hotel and moved to Boston in August 1971. She was trying to figure out what to do. Graduate school was a possibility. My oldest sister lived in Boston, and it was a good place for Ellen to start fresh and sort of figure out her life as a young adult. Ellen Rutchick found work at the Colonnade Hotel in Boston, where she did event planning. On the night of January 5th, 1972, Rutchick left a girlfriend's apartment and walked 10 minutes to her Beacon Street apartment. When she didn't show up for work on January 6th, someone went to her apartment to check on her. After Ellen was murdered in her Boston apartment 38 years ago, her family chose not to focus on the young woman's death, but to remember her in life. That image of her as this beautiful, vibrant, intelligent young woman is the image that's frozen in time for us. A case like this can sometimes leave loved ones and others feeling cheated that justice couldn't be done in time. Obviously, we hope this development is a source of comfort rather than frustration for them. After all, Ellen's killer faces a far harsher judgment in the next world than any court could mete out in this one. 38 years after authorities found Ellen Rutchick partially clothed and strangled with an electrical cord in her Back Bay apartment, police said that they had cracked the case, one of an increasing number of old crimes solved with new forensic methods. Using DNA matching technology, Cold Case Squad investigators identified Michael Sumpter as the suspect in the 1972 slaying of the 23-year-old secretary. Police also named him as a suspect in the 1985 assault of a 21-year-old woman who also lived in the Back Bay apartments. This development demonstrates that although sometimes justice may be delayed, with dogged detective work, dedicated prosecutors, and highly skilled crime lab technicians, justice does not have to be denied. The biological evidence that in 2005 linked Sumpter to the 1985 assault was the 30th match to a Suffolk County case made by CODIS. 4 years later, the evidence linking Sumpter to Rutchick's slaying was the 663rd match on a Suffolk County case. The system's database holds about 7 million DNA profiles. This is a great relief. It is helpful to know who the murderer was, particularly for me, because I always wondered if it was someone I knew. My understanding is that it was totally random. Ellen's sister described her as a very smart, bright, delightful person who had a lot of friends and was very enjoyable to be around. Irene Rutchick said she's not concerned that Sumpter never faced justice for killing her sister. It was a real tragedy to our family for many, many years that she was no longer with us. But I think he faced justice in many ways. He died in prison. For us, it's a relief just to know the facts. Corey Rutchick, another sister, wrote in an email that she has no doubt Sumpter killed her sister, saying, "We are entirely convinced that this is the right person, given the DNA evidence and other facts presented to us." 24-year-old Westport, Connecticut native Mary Lee McLean had moved to Boston in 1971 after graduating from DePauw University, a private college in Greencastle, Indiana. She was a secretary at social agency, the Alcohol Safety Action Program on Federal Street. Mary lived in a modest upstairs apartment at 140 Beacon Street in the Beacon Hill area of Boston. In the early morning hours of December 12, 1973, Mary was assaulted and had died of brutal asphyxiation. She was found in her bed at 8 a.m. that morning by her roommate, Sally Romer. It's been 40 years, and it's just haunted me my whole life, wondering who did this to her. Cold case cops, working with the help of a federal grant, began probing McLean's death anew in 2010. They compared DNA evidence from the case to genetic profiles in a federal database. Sumpter's genetic profile came up as a match in May, and investigators re-interviewed witnesses. When they found McLean had no way of knowing Sumpter, and they matched his MO to the other cases, they knew they had their man. Ellen Rutchick was murdered in her own apartment on an upper floor on Beacon Street. Mary McLean was assaulted and murdered in her own bed in an upper floor apartment on Beacon Hill. The similarities are extremely significant. He also said it's highly probable Sumpter's name will pop up again as his team runs more old evidence through the database. Do you think that's all he's ever done? I don't think so. McLean's sister Kathy, her only surviving relative, said the break in the case has at long last brought her relief. It's been 40 years, and it's just haunted me my whole life, wondering who did this to her. What a huge gift this was to me to finally have resolution. Michael Sumpter was a career criminal. He started as a 19-year-old, getting arrested in 1965 for purse snatching. Based on DNA evidence and arrest records, it is believed that he was most active between 1968 and 1975. Forensic DNA tests on the sample discovered at the crime scene didn't initially get a hit in CODIS when it was submitted in 2004. Authorities hoped that forensic technology would one day be advanced enough to generate a complete profile of the murderer, but it took some time. In 2005, Boston PD's Unsolved Murder Squad had reopened the Ellen Rutschik case at the urging of Ellen's relatives, who knew there was forensic material from the murderer. 5 years later, in 2010, they got a hit in the CODIS database, and it was revealed that Michael Sumpter was responsible for Ellen's death. Sumpter had been dead for nearly 9 years at that time. On October 18, 2012, police announced that they had linked the unsolved murder of Mary McLean to Michael Sumpter, 11 years too late. Authorities had kept evidence from the crime scene under laboratory conditions. It paid off. Amateur sleuths tried for years to figure out who killed Jane Britton, the popular Harvard grad whose death in 1969 was still a mystery. There were plenty of theories sent to the Boston PD over the years. They chatted about it on Reddit and other forums. Some were even convinced their theory about a certain suspect was absolutely accurate. They were all wrong. In 2018, a fresh look at the DNA from the Britton case was analyzed. Middlesex County investigators announced on November 21st of 2018 that they finally had a match. Michael Sumpter. It took new tools, namely DNA analysis and forensic genealogy, to finally put the puzzle together. Investigators tracked down Sumpter's brother, who cooperated with authorities by giving them a DNA sample. It ruled out Sumpter's brother and confirmed that Michael Sumpter had committed the ultimate crime. The Britton case was the oldest cold case solved by Middlesex County prosecutors. It took just shy of 50 years to finally close the files. Sumpter died of cancer on August 10, 2001. He had been released from prison and placed in hospice care at Lemuel Shattuck Hospital Correctional Unit in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. He never paid the price for taking the lives of at least 3 young women that we know of. It's certainly possible that there are unsolved murders that police either didn't find DNA evidence at the time, they failed to properly store it, or it simply hasn't been run through the CODIS database yet. What do you think? Do you think Michael Sumpter only committed these murders, or do you think that he got away with even more? With technology advancing steadily each year and new, highly successful techniques like forensic genealogy, there must be some very scared murderers out there. Good. They should be afraid. Authorities are coming for you. Let's just hope that you're still alive when they find you, for the victims and their families' sake. This is Solve Crimes.